All right. Hello, everyone. I flew in from Rome today, just for you. And in Rome, the weather is a bit better, but that's always the case, I guess. So why am I here today? I wanted to start with a quick survey in the room. Please raise your hand if you agree to the following sentence. The future of Germany and the world, I'm quite pessimistic about it. Almost everyone. And maybe the ones who didn't understand the question, right? All right, please raise your hand if you agree to the statement. My own future, I'm quite optimistic about that. Almost everyone. Well, so we can already see maybe it's a bit more complex thinking about futures. And the reason I wrote this book, most of us think about, future as something that just happens to us, like a comet, what's the word? Meteorite. It's something that happens and we can't influence it. We can't prevent it. But it's a fact that future is something, we're thinking about now. It's here now. Future is what we think about today. And so, most people are like, oh, maybe there's a German minister here this evening, the climate of the world. And our own little future, it's disconnected from that. But really, it's all like stacked within each other, like Russian dolls. And that's why I wrote this book, because you don't need someone to tell you it's not going to be as bad as you think it will be. But you need to understand that we all have this capacity in our brain to think about future today. And so I thought about, instruction manuals for a vacuum. And I'm going to write a book just in that style. I don't know if you read instruction manuals. I don't usually, but now I wrote one myself. It's a bit absurd, but oh well. And so an instruction manual tells you how to handle something, right? And so at the end of this talk, I want to give you the ability to have the feeling of being able to influence the future, to actually handle it, and to not just think about it as something that will happen to you. And so why do humans have the ability to imagine something that's not here yet, that doesn't exist yet, and maybe will never exist? What is it made of? How do you handle it, and what do you do if it's broken? And I think a lot of us feel like the future's broken. So, what is the future? Most people think, well, it's always been the same. People think about stuff that might happen. But when we look at history, we see that the human imagination about future has really changed and shifted quite a lot. So the old Romans and the old Greeks, they had a very different conception of that. So the Oracle of Delphi, right? Where this sort of future, they thought of the world as being influenced by gods that were just the same as humans, with emotions, irrationality, and it's really nothing ordinary people can do to influence that. And maybe you can sort of understand what's happening, but you cannot influence it at all. So, for example, the story of Oedipus, there's this oracle saying, right, that he will marry his mother and kill his father, so they send him away. And then he returns as an adult. He doesn't know who his father is. He kills him, and he marries his mother because he doesn't know she's his mother. And so that's sort of emblematic of this ancient idea of future. There's no responsibility for the future. You're just you have to deal with what comes your way. And so left and right, you can see the final judgment, right? In Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, some forms of Judaism, and almost every major religion that we know today, they institutionalize responsibility, the concept of responsibility. What my actions today, I will be held responsible for them in the future. And that's revolutionary in comparison to the ancient Greek and Roman ideal. And so it's something where you can do something about the future and where you ought to do something about the future. And that's a crucial moment to the history of humanity, because we have this understanding of future as something we're responsible for, which we can influence, where we understand if I do A, then B might happen. And that only happened in the 17th and 18th century with the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, the discovery of how pregnancy works, gravity, and all of that really only started in the 18th century. And so this concept of future that we have today, that we live with today, that's not as old as you might think.
And we have this future cone. It's a very popular tool in our line of work. We're here, and ahead of us there are lots and lots of possible futures, and that's the thing about future. There's not one single future. There are lots and lots of possible futures. Like at any point in time, there are even 1,000 futures present in this room. Not only about climate change. All of you can think of multitudes of possible futures, where you're going to go on holiday, what you're going to have for dinner. All of these are futures, and only one of these futures is going to happen in the end. That's one of the reasons why future is overwhelming, because there are so many futures and we don't know which is actually going to apply. And of course, in the center, we have the projected future, the business as usual future. We like to say that it's never been as bad as it is now. The future is uncertain. That's not true. It's not true because each and every one of us is born with what we call a life expectancy today. So the concept that I can be born and expect to live until 80, I can look at my phone and find out what the weather is going to be like. If I'm involved in a legal proceeding, I know what the law is. What I'm trying to get at is our ancestors, somebody who lived in Berlin 150 years ago, had a lot less certainty than we have. But we have more knowledge, more certainty about what's going to happen. We don't live in a time of high uncertainty. I like to say that we live in a time of high certainty, and that makes us allergic to everything we can't predict. It's over-regulated, and we have an overreaction to everything we don't understand. These are the outer borders of the future. Preposterous, very unlikely to happen, possible, plausible, and so on. But the most important thing is that the futures can be distinguished by distance. Am I going to make my flight? That's one very small future, but it's a future. Probability and influence. And the difference between the first and the second question is influence. Most people think that they can influence their own future. Not everything, of course, not all of it, but a lot of it. But you can influence your own future more than the future of Germany's, and that correlates with pessimism. It's a historical fact. I've looked at studies from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and people like to say everything used to be better, but that's not true. Germans were afraid of different things, but they were afraid. I don't want to talk down these problems, but it's normal to be afraid of the things you can't influence. And then we have the 4 categories of future, like Russian nesting dolls. The small future is called every day. Most of us don't consider what they're going to have for breakfast anew every day. Then the projects of our lives, the projects of humanity. These are, well, this used to be dominated by religions. Today, due to climate change, it's also part of a political debate. But why do we have this? We're born with this incredible ability to imagine so many things. Each and every one of us was lying awake at night and thinking about these worst-case scenarios. My sister isn't coming home. Did she get run over by a car? Did I forget to turn off the coffee machine at work? And it never turned out as bad as we imagined. So why do we have these futures? There's this interesting approach that says that, well, we like to call ourselves Homo sapiens, but we should be called Homo prospectors, so the human who thinks about the future, because that's what we spend most of our time on, not necessarily the big futures. During the day, humans spend most of their time thinking about the future. And even when we think about the past, it's mostly because we're interested in its implications for the future. So we're obsessed with the future because most of the things that make us human depend on that ability. Being human means making decisions. And thankfully, in the 21st century, we can make a lot of decisions. We can make decisions of so many kinds, but for that we need this future ability. Should I marry this person or that person, or no person at all? And only since the age of brain scans, we know that our brain shows the same amount of activity when considering the future as it does when we think about something that we actually experienced. It's like the holodeck in Star Trek, which is constantly running and is taking a lot of our mental bandwidth. So, considering all the possibilities, what do I want to study? Who do I want to be? Where do I want to live? All these things that the 21st century is giving us, we couldn't profit from these if we didn't have this future ability. There's also handling uncertainty. This is the fun part of my talk. There is a study that asked people, you can either wait 10 minutes and there's a 50% chance of getting an electric shock, or do you want an electric shock right now? Who of you would like an electric shock right now? You're not crazy, you're humans, because people hate uncertainty. People prefer a negative certainty to a possible negative uncertainty. And being able to reduce those negative uncertainties, that's what the future ability is for. If I wouldn't, well, and being human means having visions, traveling somewhere, wanting to experience or learn something, not necessarily in this capitalist entertainment idea, but being in movement. And one part of that is having a vision for where you want to be. Do I want to be a super surfer, for example? You need future ability for all these things. There are people who don't have this. There are people with amnesia. There's a patient who is lacking part of their brain. They don't have short-term memory, but they also can't answer the question, what are you going to do this Saturday? So being human is defined by this ability to think about the future.
Yeah, so like I said, all of you possess this ability, and it's very it's great to have this capability, right? And so it happens on autopilot, and put these items in it. And so the first things first, you have to turn on future. And so our perception of time is like a car. It's like a manual transmission car. You can't be in multiple gears at once. You can't think about past, present, and future at once. And so meditation is all about being in the present, right? And yeah, to think creatively about multiple things is not possible. Of course, you can think about future while you're like cutting tomatoes or something, but you can't think about future and present at once. And how do you turn on future, so to speak? Well, planning for once. Take a piece of paper and a pen, and you think about, oh, I want to achieve this and that. I want to go on vacation to France. And planning it's hard work. It's hard cognitive work. Who enjoys planning? All right, yeah, of course, I'm in Berlin. So in Rome, where I live, I think the answer might have been a bit different. But the second way to turn on the future is daydreaming. And that contains the word dreaming. And you can also use the English term mind wandering. And I prefer that because, it's like the mind is doing that on its own. And you can't really do that actively, right? It's just sort of your mind does that. But you have to have certain conditions for that to happen. So if you use your smartphone, look at that prevents you from mind wandering. But if you're in this sort of like very nice state of being, then your mind can start to wander, and you might, get great ideas from that. For example, when you stare out the window on a train, or when you're listening to a boring talk. And I really, really recommend this to all of you to, have these conditions in your life to let your mind wander. And so all of us put these three things into this channel to think about future. And of course, it depends on our experiences, on our past lives. So the personal history, the history you absorb from friends, family, books, TV. Without history, there's no future. Why? Because this imaginary movie that's running in your brain, you need ideas to fuel that. So, for example, have you talked to a 4-year-old about future? It's quite hard because 4-year-olds don't know what is possible, and so personal history is quite important. And people who are very creative when thinking about future, those are people that have a diverse friendship circles, that read a lot, that travel a lot, and so on. And the present has this kind of a special role in relation to the future, because everything you feel in the present will limit your way to think about future. For example, alcohol, drugs, sex. And so I'm not going to go into detail, but I don't think a lot of people have thought about their pension plan while they were attending a party, right? Because all these stimuli in the present, you sort of when you drink too much at a party, that's not your problem. That's tomorrow Florence's problem. And there's a term for that that's called future discounting. So we mostly think about how am I feeling today, how am I feeling now, how am I doing physically? Am I cold? Did I just eat a cheeseburger? And so we don't yet know why fast food sort of makes time go faster in our perception. But the important thing is newness. So, for example, if I showed you a sci-fi movie and everything looked just the same as it does today, you wouldn't say, wow, that's a sci-fi film. Because sci-fi is about difference. It needs to be different from the present. And that's innovation. That's something new, creating something new. And so future is always about something new that's not here yet. And so for me and my work, because I work at NATO, that's not a field of work where creativity is the focus point. But as an individual in companies, the most important thing to solve problems is creativity. And so you mix these 3 points together, experience, present, and innovation, and then you cast it away immediately. You create and project all of these futures every day, and then you discard them. And so with this horror scenario, as soon as my sister arrives safely home and she didn't get run over by a car, I immediately forget about the fear that I just had and this possible future I created. And so what do we do with this? We live in a time where not all 4 of these items are in balance. And I think that's a reason why I wrote the book. A lot of people, are so afraid of the future. And so how do you deal with it differently? And the first thing you do is you set aside what you know for sure. So safety, securities, is that the right word? The sun will rise in the morning, something like that. What can we depend on? And for us in our work, where you think about future strategically, what do I know for certain, and what do I don't know? And so the second one is managing risks. Some risks you can't eliminate completely, but you have to manage them. And in Germany, we have insurance companies when we think about car crashes and something like that. But on a higher level, there's always the possibility of something bad happening, and you have to manage that actively. And what's the great thing about that? You immediately feel better. You're less afraid, because having a future and thinking about the future is always an active action. Because if you just think about these, horror, fearful scenarios, you also need to come to a conclusion of what to do at the end. You think about, what do I know? What could go wrong? And what could go right? In this space of possibility, it's never just bad and it's never just good. And so I did some research, and in the 50s, when we look back, we have this distorted view of the 50s, of the 1950s. So in looking back, people thought there would be a Third World War, it would be a nuclear war, and the world would end. But there was also this idea of progression. And so it was this mix of progression and terror. And just because, we feel bad now when we think about the future, it doesn't mean that it's going to get as bad as we expect.
And today we tend to forget that the future don't always has to be bad, that that positive things can happen if we work on it. And the least popular point is the last one in Germany. You can try to predict the future as much as you want. There are always going to be surprises. Some of them are going to be good, some are not. When the pandemic started, when the war started, people kept asking, well, who failed to predict this? It's not possible to predict everything. That's what physics and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle tells us. You can't predict the future, not all of it, not always. There are 3 things you should not do. Wishful thinking and catastrophic thinking, its cousin, both of these are dangerous. Wishful thinking is when you think that a positive vision of the future has already happened. Football fans do this a lot. There are studies that show that football fans are very bad at predicting if their team is going to win. That's okay because football isn't critical, but in the case of war, it's problematic. If you think that war can't happen, then that's not the same as running an analysis and being optimistic about war. But catastrophic thinking is quite similar. It starts from a point of thinking that the worst is unavoidable. We don't need to act. And I'm showing you a picture of the last generation movement, because even though I think that this organization is following a goal that we all should follow, preventing the climate crisis, there is no study that shows that we are all going to die because of climate change. The problem is that's what catastrophic thinking does to you. I have a person from Greek mythology for you, Cassandra. She could predict the future, but people didn't take her seriously. When humans are overloaded with catastrophic thinking, then they stop acting. A classic example of that is, for example, smoking. If you tell people that smoking is bad for them, if you overload them, they're going to do the opposite. And then thirdly, we have certain assumptions. And the then CEO of Microsoft, who thought that the iPhone was never going to be successful. My recommendation would be to ask yourself, what would cause me to change my opinion? And have a mental high water mark that tells you that, okay, when this happens, then I'm going to have to change my opinion. Mental agility is the secret weapon of future thinking. Can I find solutions to evaluate this space of possibilities? Can I find opportunity that I've overlooked? How to repair it? Find old futures and let go of them. All of us have had to do that. For example, when a relationship ended, when a dream was over. There's a certain amount of grief involved, but that you can get through it. Some futures regenerate on their own. For example, broken relationships, you don't have to do everything on your own. Most of these carry too much negativity. There is a double negativity in climate change. Firstly, everything is going to be terrible. Secondly, unless you stop doing. So this narrative of loss. So we have a double negative here. But you need a positive aspect to engage you. A positive counterbalance. I was in Saudi Arabia last year, where they're talking about climate change in this way. Hey, it's not bad if we stop eating meat. We're going to live healthier. We're going to be more in balance with nature. The air is going to improve. There are going to be fewer illnesses. And that's a story you can tell about climate change also in Germany, but it's not happening. And the other aspects have too little novelty. That's typical of German politics. When you look at what parties are proposing, it's either a very negative future, a return to the past, or saying that tomorrow is going to be the same as today. And that's not very sexy. We all want to look forward to something, to work towards something, even work hard, but it has to be shown to us. And that's what science fiction is great at. What can we do? What can you change? There's no point in lying awake at night and thinking about something that you can't influence. For example, the end of humanity. But there are small things that all of us can do. finding the vision, find something you enjoy about the future, you want to work towards. Learn to live with the negatives, and don't be afraid of surprises. So, because being human always means change. Thank you very much.